Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and I'm pointing at it now on the video. That's the bin that I want to check in on today. That's the bin that I've got my original population of red wigglers in. It's actually the only bin that I've got my original population of red wigglers in. At one point years ago when I first started out, my first thing was to split my population, get them, divided into separate containers where they can grow and then get split again. And at one point I had a whole bunch of bins with those original worms in them, or ones that could stem back to that original population. But I had a big catastrophic situation, and I was lucky enough to find some survivors with which I was able to populate a small bin. They've since moved into this regular size bin, and most recently I've been kind of classifying them as not being any different from any other bin because they've managed to sort of bounce back. So like I do sometimes, I pulled together some info about this system here, and it's on this green board. It's 111 days old now. It's had 10 feedings over that time. It was 10 days ago when we last checked in here, but all the other stuff that I've got on here is all the different names that we've given this bin over the past few months of its lifespan. I think back in the early days we might have used some of these expressions like Lazarus, Phoenix, just recovery, the concept of recovery in general. Most recently I think I used the whole concept of it's not a recovery bin anymore. A restoration test, I think that was one of the early ones too. Adam and Eve, kind of like the originals, just like OG, the original gangster idea there. So yeah, I probably missed a few. These were derived just from looking through the titles of my older videos. But that's the bin I want to go check in on today. So I'm going to put a glove on, get that bin up on the bench, and we'll see how it's doing. Now, at the age of 111 days, this bin is already kind of in that realm of consideration, I guess, that I might not want to continue adding bedding to the system, bedding that would probably survive the planned age of the bin. At this point, I'd really like to stick to putting stuff into the container that is most likely going to break down in a reasonable amount of time. I don't even know how to quantify it. There's some sort of formula to it, I'm sure, but it's obviously related to its impending completion day, where the idea would be to move the worms out and harvest the castings, so on and so forth. But you don't want to have it littered with all kinds of little freshly added shredded paper or whatever the case may be from just a week before. So in anticipation of the bin's eventual graduation and completion, I like to really limit or pretty much withhold the addition of bedding. So I think that in keeping with that, we're going to apply only food today. I'm going to bring down one of these filters that's got coffee in it, but we're not going to give them the filter this time. We're going to give them only the coffee, maybe even 2 days worth of coffee. I've also taken some frozen veggies out of the freezer so that they would have a chance to thaw out a little bit. I usually like to put in a good amount of bedding, and that bedding serves as sort of an insulator so that if there are any worms nearby, the bedding that I'm putting in protects them from the frozen foods that I'm feeding. But if I'm not really adding any bedding, then I think it's probably a little bit safer to let the material that you're going to be feeding with thaw out if it's frozen, like what I've got going on. There's a lot of bedding here, That's the thing. I mentioned earlier how the system was sort of upgraded from being in a smaller container to a larger container. The way I did that was I basically dumped the small container's contents on top of a pretty good thick mound of fresh bedding. And see, we're already bumping into some of the apple bits from the last feeding. Here's a piece of the skin where it looks like most of the actual apple's been nibbled off of it. Hopefully that's the case in most places. I think with something like apple, which I sort of classify as a slower composting food item, I don't treat this as, hey, the worms are not hungry. I treat this as more, hey, this material needs a little bit more time to mature to that stage where the worms can actually make use of it as a food item. So that's why I think I feel okay about placing in additional food right there alongside what might appear to be a good amount of leftovers, because these leftovers do appear as if they're getting worked on now, but that might have just started. It might have taken up until now for these bits of apple to actually start into the decomposition process and get to the stage that's far enough that the worms can actually start benefiting from it as a food source. I'm sure that earlier on, once it was starting to thaw, almost immediately after it was placed into the bin last time, it probably emitted a bunch of its moisture, but held on to a good bit of it as well. So you can really feel it that these pieces of peel have hardly any apple left on them. They're almost just, paper thin sheets of peel anymore. So a little bit of leftovers, but I would say not too much. Just little bits of the material that will take a bit longer, such as the peels themselves. There was also this banana peel. The stem will take a little longer, but the peel will probably be gone soon. Here and there we're seeing a worm or two, but it's not a mob scene type of a situation. I think it's more like they're just all over the place. A few of them here, a few of them there. Maybe this apple is just not the sort of stuff that draws their attention the way maybe something else would. Well, I don't know. Hopefully I'm not making a mistake. I do feel a little bit like I'm on the borderline there, where putting a whole bunch of food in here today is almost going to take us into a glut sort of a situation. But I'm going to take my chances today, but I'm going to sort of do so cautiously, which says, I'm not going to make that a habit here. I'm going to, obviously, next time I check in, take into consideration that maybe, we got to go later on the feeding, or maybe skip a feeding session, give them a little more time to get caught up with the previous portions. But I'm going to go upstairs now, go grab those foods that I've got for them. Hopefully they've thawed out enough that they're, not going to end up disturbing any worms that the stuff might come in contact with. And then I think as we cover up, we'll get a chance to check out what's going on the outskirts of this bin. I'm curious of that as well. So I'll be right back. This tasty assortment is what they're getting. It's more apple peels, as you can see, some carrot peels, cauliflower, green beans, maybe some other stuff. Plus, coffee only. I'm not going to give them the filters. I'm going to hang on to the filters for some other use. At this point, I'm going to go with food only. Maybe some grit too. I've got that over here as well. So the reason I thought it out, like I said earlier, is to make me feel okay about just dumping it in. But it is a little bit chilly still. Still got a little bit of a cool bite to it. So I'm going to assume that we might still have a few worms hanging out down here. Let me lay down some of this room temperature coffee as a little bit of a buffer here. Just a temperature buffer, just in case there's still, a little worm or two hanging out down below where the feedings have been going on. Wouldn't be too surprising. Just recycle some of this bedding, mix it in with the coffee. Whatever, let's give them the entire day's worth of coffee. There's still another one over there. On top of that can go this entire portion. Let's just pour it out. I keep telling myself how it seems so much more in the kitchen. Once you get it down here and actually down into the bin, sometimes it starts to look like not quite as much. So I had this kind of feeling like maybe it was perhaps a slightly oversized feeding, but now that it's actually down here within the bin, it doesn't seem like it should be too much of a problem for these little guys to hopefully bite into this collection of yummy stuff here too. Stuff like the green beans I know go really quick. These stems of stuff like a cauliflower would go pretty quick, I believe. Just these apple peels, I guess. The apple peels have sort of a resistance to breaking down, I think, and they'll all get there at some point. Just got to be patient. So that's a nice feeding, but it's not done yet, right? Still wanted to toss in a little bit of grit, help the worms consume the food. And we've still got a little bit more coffee to drop in, but I've also got a little collection of cloves here used to spice up a little bit of tea. Now all this food that's laying here, once we sprinkle all this coffee onto the top of it and jiggle it around, I think it's going to give all this food a nice coating of coffee. Should make for a pretty delectable feeding area for these little wormies. I've just got this feeling like coming back in another week or 10 days might be premature. We might have to give these little guys some time to make their way through this pretty generous feeding. But I think these little guys have actually surprised me on a couple occasions now, so I've been trying to talk myself out of trying to always coddle this bin and just treat it like any other bin, and you know, challenge it with a good batch of kitchen scraps or whatever it is that I need broken down at the time. So some of this paper is clumping together here a little bit. I think when I mixed this bedding, I didn't really use enough leaves. The leaves that I put in, I think, helps a lot with keeping these pieces of paper from matting up to each other and clumping. So I've got a little bit more of my homemade bedding on demand bedding ready to go, which has a good amount of leaves in it this time. It doesn't clump like this, but whatever. We're just going to make good use of it as is. Before we close up, like I said earlier, we're just taking a peek down the sides. I don't know, the impression I get every time I look through this bin is that it's just so far along with so many castings. And we naturally see worms almost everywhere we go. We're always bumping into a worm or two. We couldn't say that in the past when we would look through this bin. So there are worms all over the place, and I'm sure there's a lot of them that we're just not seeing because they're hard at work nibbling away at some yummy morsel of food. So yeah, I don't think there's too much to worry about. And I guess, you know, maybe we'll wait another 10 days like we did this time and see how they're doing on this portion. Hopefully they will have made some good progress on it. I think a lot of the things they got today are the types of things that we would expect to see break down a little bit more rapidly than chunks of apple. Apple, I think, is known to take a little bit longer in most cases in the worm bin. So I like how things look in here. Very nice bin. Give them a good portion of food. No fresh bedding on this go around. Just a nice portion of kitchen scraps, a little bit of coffee. And we're just going to return all these top coverings more or less the way we found them. I think that little portion of grit might even help them with the breakdown of the materials. So yeah, this is a pretty interesting bin. It does certainly seem like it's got the capability of any other bin, the way things are progressing in here with all these castings. It never seems like you're bumping into a large quantity of worms, but it always seems like the things going on in this bin are just like any other bin in terms of their capability of breaking things down and making progress. So, I mean, maybe not quite like any other bin, maybe just a little bit slower for good reason, but certainly no slouch. At least that's my opinion. I don't know if anyone's been watching and has a different opinion about this bin, but I think the majority of people will tend to agree. This little recovery bin here is doing a great job. Recovery bin, is it on the list? I think it is. And if I missed one, please write it in the comments. Please help refresh my memory. What other things have we, either I called it or you guys have called it in the comments? On many occasions we've used many names to refer to this bin's bounce back ability, it seems. I think that was another one of them. So I'd be interested in hearing if I've missed any. And if I did, please write them down below. Alright everyone, that's it for today. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day.